Galactic protocols exist for good reason. They prevent catastrophic mistakes. Every advanced civilization follows established crisis management procedures because someone, at some point, learned the hard way what happens when you don't. These procedures represent centuries of accumulated wisdom, tested responses to known scenarios, and safety margins that account for every conceivable variable. They're the product of careful analysis and painful experience, not bureaucratic whimsy. Every species understands this fundamental truth except humanity. Humans view protocols as suggestions at best and obstacles at worst. Where other civilizations see necessary safeguards, they see unnecessary complications. I watched a human engineer bypass 15 safety interlocks because, as she put it, they were slowing things down. The fact that those interlocks prevented reactor meltdowns seemed less important than the fact that they added 20 minutes to her repair timeline. Their solution to the Antares contamination involved household cleaning supplies. Standard decontamination requires specialized biofilters, quarantine procedures, and controlled environmental sterilization that takes 3 days minimum. The humans arrived with industrial-grade detergents, pressurized sprayers, and what appeared to be modified floor scrubbers. While the rest of us were waiting for approved containment equipment to arrive from 3 systems away, they were already sanitizing the affected areas with chemicals you could buy at any commercial cleaning supply store. The standard approach involves isolating the contaminant, analyzing its composition, then applying precisely calibrated counteragents. Humans skipped straight to the application phase using broad-spectrum solutions that technically shouldn't have worked according to any biological handbook. Their method was like using a sledgehammer to perform surgery, crude, unrefined, but surprisingly effective at removing the problem. What makes their pragmatism so effective is how it bypasses bureaucratic constraints. Where other species need committee approvals and safety validations, humans operate on immediate practical assessment. If something works, they use it. If it doesn't, they try something else. Their decision-making process involves less deliberation and more experimentation, treating each failed attempt as data rather than failure. This approach differs from standard protocols because it prioritizes immediate results over perfect methodology. Galactic procedures aim for optimal outcomes through controlled processes. Humans aim for functional outcomes through whatever means available. They'll achieve 80% effectiveness in hours rather than wait days for 100% perfection. In crisis situations, that 20% difference often matters less than the time saved. The resolution lies in their willingness to accept good enough solutions when perfect ones aren't immediately available. Other species see compromise as failure. Humans see it as progress. Their methods work because they understand that sometimes preventing disaster means using the tools you have rather than waiting for the tools you wish you had. This pragmatism is powered by something deeper than mere improvisation. It comes from a fundamental belief that solutions should be measured by their effectiveness, not their elegance. They care more about whether something works than how it looks on paper, or whether it follows established conventions. Their approach values results over process in ways that seem reckless until you see how often those results save lives and stabilize situations that protocol-bound methods can't handle. Let me tell you about human stubbornness. It's not a personality trait, it's a strategic resource. Galactic military doctrine emphasizes tactical withdrawal when overwhelmed, because that's what the numbers say you should do. When casualty projections exceed acceptable parameters, when resource expenditure outweighs potential gains, when mathematical models show inevitable defeat, you pull back. It's not cowardice, it's calculated preservation of assets for future engagements. The entire concept of strategic retreat exists because sometimes staying costs more than leaving. Humans dig in harder when facing impossible odds. I watched a human platoon defend a mining outpost against forces that outnumbered them 20-1. Standard tactical assessment showed 0% chance of successful defense. Every other species would have evacuated or surrendered to prevent unnecessary losses. The humans reinforced the perimeter instead. They didn't just hold their ground, they seemed to become more determined as the situation worsened. During the siege of Proxima, they held positions that should have been mathematically untenable. Their defensive lines held for 17 hours against constant assault, despite ammunition shortages and failing shield generators. I watched soldiers manually holding damaged barriers in place because the automated systems had failed. They weren't following any established defensive doctrine. They were making up new rules based on sheer refusal to yield ground. Their command structure devolved into individual squads making independent decisions that somehow coordinated into an effective defense. Analysis shows human endurance thresholds exceed physiological limits by significant margins. Their bodies produce stress hormones and neural responses that should cause system shutdown under extreme duress, but instead they enter this heightened state of functionality. Medical scans during high-stress combat situations show humans operating at 130% of their documented physical capabilities while maintaining cognitive function that should be impossible given the physiological strain. They don't just push through pain, they somehow convert it into additional capacity. This stubbornness creates opportunities where none should exist because it changes the fundamental equation of conflict. Opposing forces expect rational responses to overwhelming force. When humans respond with increased resistance instead of retreat, it disrupts tactical calculations. I've seen entire offensive operations fail because the attacking force couldn't adjust to defenders who refused to acknowledge they were supposed to lose. The humans created openings by simply not behaving like defeated forces should behave. The role human stubbornness plays in surviving impossible cosmic threats is that it redefines what impossible means. Other species accept statistical probabilities as reality. Humans treat probabilities as challenges to be overcome. This isn't blind optimism. It's a conscious rejection of predetermined outcomes. They'll spend resources defending positions that have no strategic value simply because they've decided those positions shouldn't be lost. This creates secondary effects that often turn the tide of entire conflicts. Watching this stubbornness in action changes perspectives on what constitutes viable strategy. You start seeing calculated withdrawal not as wisdom but as premature concession. You begin questioning whether probability models account for the human factor of simply refusing to accept probable outcomes. Their approach suggests that sometimes the most effective strategy is to ignore the strategy entirely and just keep fighting because you've decided losing isn't an option worth considering. So there I was, taking notes on species reactions during the quantum cascade failure. Most species respond to crisis with practiced efficiency or controlled panic because that's what evolution and training prepare us for. The Vorthax deploy containment teams with mechanical precision. The Zelanians enter meditative states that optimize decision-making under stress. And the Gronians follow emergency protocols so exactly you could set clocks by their movements. Everyone has their role, their procedure, their established pattern for handling disaster. Human response teams arrived arguing about sports scores while setting up equipment. I watched engineers bicker about some terrestrial ball game called baseball while calibrating quantum stabilizers that required millimeter precision. Their lead technician was explaining batting averages to his assistant while rewiring power conduits that could have vaporized the entire station if misconnected. They worked with casual efficiency that seemed completely disconnected from the gravity of the situation. Their casual demeanor confused observers expecting grave seriousness. Military commanders from 3 species kept checking their translation units, convinced they were missing some critical context. The human team's laughter and casual insults didn't match the visual of space-time unraveling outside the observation windows. I saw a Zelanian admiral actually reboot his translation device 3 times, certain it was malfunctioning because the humans couldn't possibly be discussing recreational activities during a Class 9 emergency. You know, the Galactic Council has an entire emergency protocol manual dedicated solely to humanity. They call it the Tuesday Contingency. I was there when a Xylosian admiral tried to invoke it during a nebular collapse event. He expected panic stations. Humanity sent a single engineer with a coffee thermos and a multi-tool. You know, after 17 galactic rotations observing species tear each other apart, you develop a comfortable bubble of detachment. It's like becoming a cosmic umpire who's seen every possible play. You know, the Vogons will follow protocol to the letter, the Andorians will prioritize diplomacy, and the Klingons, well, they'll find something to hit. The galaxy runs on predictable patterns, like a well-oiled machine where every gear knows its exact function. Then humanity shows up, and suddenly the whole machine starts making sounds it shouldn't. None of the classification systems work with them. Their psychological profiles read like contradictory medical diagnoses. They test as both highly cautious and recklessly impulsive simultaneously. Galactic sociologists initially pegged them as moderately resilient with low adaptability, based on standard stress response metrics. They were spectacularly wrong. The first time I reviewed a human crisis response team's file, I thought there'd been a paperwork error. One subject showed elevated cortisol levels suggesting panic, while another in the same unit displayed neural patterns indicating focused calm. Their biometric readings looked like someone had mixed up 3 different species datasheets. The standard assessment scales couldn't handle humans, because they kept changing their own baseline readings during testing. What makes them so fundamentally different isn't some special gene or evolutionary trick. It's that they don't have a single standardized response to danger. Where other species evolved specific survival mechanisms, humans maintained this chaotic toolbox of possibilities. They might freeze, fight, or start taking notes depending on which option seems most interesting at that particular moment. Their danger assessment operates on some completely different calibration system. A minor inconvenience might trigger full-scale panic, while an actual galaxy-ending event gets treated with the seriousness of a slightly challenging crossword puzzle. I once watched a human engineer complain more about a malfunctioning coffee maker than about the radiation leak that had every other species evacuating the sector. That first major incident that shattered our comfortable classification system wasn't some dramatic first contact scenario. It was something much more mundane, which somehow made it more disturbing. The way they handled what should have been a routine diplomatic incident revealed that everything we thought we knew about crisis response needed rewriting. That first incident wasn't what anyone expected, because we were looking for the wrong things. We expected them to fit our patterns, to follow our logic. Instead, they brought their own logic entirely, and it was nothing like ours. Let me start by saying the Xylosian nebular collapse should have been a catastrophic event. Standard protocol called for full evacuation of 12 systems and energy containment fields. That would have taken 3 fleets to maintain. Every advanced species knows the drill when space-time starts unraveling. You contain, you evacuate, you minimize losses. The mathematical models all pointed to inevitable cascade failure across half the sector. Human response teams arrived 6 hours late with what looked like scrap metal piled in the back of a modified cargo shuttle. No containment equipment, no emergency field generators, just assorted machinery parts and what appeared to be salvaged components from at least 5 different technological traditions. Their lead engineer stepped off the shuttle, complaining about missing lunch rather than the collapsing nebula that was currently rewriting local physics, while quantum physicists from 7 species were running simulations showing inevitable system-wide destruction. The human team was jury-rigging something that looked like a high school science project. They used parts from communications arrays, power conduits, and what I'm pretty sure was a recycled food synthesizer. Advanced species use precision energy manipulation for containment because that's what the physics says should work. Humans apparently never read that chapter. Their solution involved creating a counter-resonance field using equipment that wasn't designed for anything remotely similar to its new purpose. It was like watching someone stop a volcano eruption with a garden hose and some clever plumbing. The mathematics made no sense to anyone with proper training. But the space-time anomalies began stabilizing within hours. The lead engineer spent most of the operation sipping from that coffee thermos and making adjustments with a multi-tool that looked like it had seen better decades. When the Xylosian admiral asked about the delayed arrival, the human just shrugged and said their navigation computer needed rebooting. No apology, no explanation for why they hadn't used standard emergency protocols. What shocked the galactic community wasn't that their solution worked. It was how casually they treated what should have been a civilization-ending event. They solved a problem that had stumped the best quantum physicists in 3 systems using what amounted to technological improvisation. No safety checks, no committee approvals, just direct action with whatever tools they had available. The containment field they created shouldn't have worked according to any known principles of physics. It violated 17 different energy conservation laws and created patterns that still haven't been properly analyzed. But it held stable for exactly as long as needed, then collapsed into harmless background radiation without any of the predicted secondary effects. That engineer's coffee thermos became legendary because it symbolized the entire approach. While everyone else was running emergency protocols and preparing for mass casualties, one human was more concerned about caffeine levels than cosmic collapse. The thermos now sits in the Galactic Museum of First Contacts with a plaque that simply reads, "Priorities." Here's the thing about human adaptability. It looks like pure chaos to everyone else. Galactic species value specialized evolution and perfected techniques because that's what creates reliable systems. We spend centuries refining a single technology until it operates within precise parameters. Humans treat specialization like it's some kind of limitation they need to work around, rather than an achievement to be proud of. They'll use a medical scanner as a welding torch if it gets the job done. I've seen them repurpose communication arrays into defensive shields and turn environmental controls into offensive weapons. Their ability to make technology do things it was never designed for violates 57 galactic safety protocols that exist for very good reasons. Most species develop safety systems to prevent accidents. Humans seem to view safety protocols as suggestions that might be worth considering if they have nothing better to do. Studies show human neural plasticity exceeds any recorded species by 300%. Their brains literally rewire themselves faster when facing new challenges. Where other species have dedicated neurological pathways for specific problem-solving methods, humans maintain this messy network of connections that can reconfigure on the fly. It's like comparing a carefully organized toolkit to a pile of parts that can become any tool needed. This chaotic approach consistently produces results where precision fails because they're not limited by predetermined solutions. When a standard containment field won't stabilize, they don't try to make better containment fields. They'll create something entirely different that happens to solve the stabilization problem as a side effect. Their solutions often look like accidental successes until you realize they've somehow made accidents work in their favor consistently. The specific trait alien species consistently underestimate is their comfort with imperfect solutions. Other civilizations seek optimal outcomes through refined methods. Humans will use a barely functional temporary fix that gets them through the next 5 minutes, then improve it while it's already working. They treat crisis management like improv theater rather than a carefully rehearsed performance. This adaptability extends to their psychological makeup too. They can shift emotional states in ways that should require neurological recalibration. One moment they're panicking about minor inconveniences. The next they're calmly facing existential threats with what appears to be genuine curiosity. Their emotional responses don't follow predictable patterns, because they've apparently decided that consistency is less important than whatever works in that particular moment. The Galactic Council has an entire emergency protocol manual dedicated solely to humanity. They call it the Tuesday Contingency. I was there when a Xylosian admiral tried to invoke it during a nebular collapse event. He expected panic stations. Humanity sent a single engineer with a coffee thermos and a multi-tool. After 17 galactic rotations observing species tear each other apart, you develop a comfortable bubble of detachment. It's like becoming a cosmic umpire who's seen every possible play. The Vogons will follow protocol to the letter, the Andorians will prioritize diplomacy, and the Klingons, they'll find something to hit. The galaxy runs on predictable patterns like a well-oiled machine where every gear knows its exact function. Then humanity shows up. And suddenly the whole machine starts making sounds it shouldn't. None of the classification systems work with them. Their psychological profiles read like contradictory medical diagnoses. They test as both highly cautious and recklessly impulsive simultaneously. Galactic sociologists initially pegged them as moderately resilient, with low adaptability based on standard stress response metrics. They were spectacularly wrong. The first time I reviewed a human crisis response team's file, I thought there'd been a paperwork error. One subject showed elevated cortisol levels suggesting panic, while another in the same unit displayed neural patterns indicating focused calm. Their biometric readings looked like someone had mixed up 3 different species data sheets. The standard assessment scales couldn't handle humans because they kept changing their own baseline readings during testing. What makes them so fundamentally different isn't some special gene or evolutionary trick. It's that they don't have a single standardized response to danger. Where other species evolved specific survival mechanisms, humans maintained this chaotic toolbox of possibilities. They might freeze, fight, or start taking notes depending on which option seems most interesting at that particular moment. Their danger assessment operates on some completely different calibration system. A minor inconvenience might trigger full-scale panic, while an actual galaxy-ending event gets treated with the seriousness of a slightly challenging crossword puzzle. I once watched a human engineer complain more about a malfunctioning coffee maker than about the radiation leak that had every other species evacuating the sector. That first major incident that shattered our comfortable classification system wasn't some dramatic first contact scenario. It was something much more mundane, which somehow made it more disturbing. The way they handled what should have been a routine diplomatic incident revealed that everything we thought we knew about crisis response needed rewriting. That first incident wasn't what anyone expected, because we were looking for the wrong things. We expected them to fit our patterns, to follow our logic. Instead, they brought their own logic entirely, and it was nothing like ours. Let me start by saying the Xylosian nebular collapse should have been a catastrophic event. Standard protocol called for full evacuation of 12 systems and energy containment fields that would have taken 3 fleets to maintain. Every advanced species knows the drill when space-time starts unraveling. You contain, you evacuate, you minimize losses. The mathematical models all pointed to inevitable cascade failure across half the sector. Human response teams arrived 6 hours late with what looked like scrap metal piled in the back of a modified cargo shuttle. No containment equipment, no emergency field generators, just assorted machinery parts and what appeared to be salvaged components from at least 5 different technological traditions. Their lead engineer stepped off the shuttle, complaining about missing lunch rather than the collapsing nebula that was currently rewriting local physics, while quantum physicists from 7 species were running simulations showing inevitable system-wide destruction. The human team was jury-rigging something that looked like a high school science project. They used parts from communications arrays, power conduits, and what I'm pretty sure was a recycled food synthesizer. Advanced species use precision energy manipulation for containment, because that's what the physics says should work. Humans apparently never read that chapter. Their solution involved creating a counter-resonance field using equipment that wasn't designed for anything remotely similar to its new purpose. It was like watching someone stop a volcano eruption with a garden hose and some clever plumbing. The mathematics made no sense to anyone with proper training, but the space-time anomalies began stabilizing within hours. The lead engineer spent most of the operation sipping from that coffee thermos and making adjustments with a multi-tool that looked like it had seen better decades. When the Xylosian admiral asked about the delayed arrival, the human just shrugged and said their navigation computer needed rebooting. No apology, no explanation for why they hadn't used standard emergency protocols. What shocked the galactic community wasn't that their solution worked. It was how casually they treated what should have been a civilization-ending event. They solved a problem that had stumped the best quantum physicists in 3 systems using what amounted to technological improvisation. No safety checks, no committee approvals, just direct action with whatever tools they had available. The containment field they created shouldn't have worked according to any known principles of physics. It violated 17 different energy conservation laws and created patterns that still haven't been properly analyzed. But it held stable for exactly as long as needed, then collapsed into harmless background radiation without any of the predicted secondary effects. That engineer's coffee thermos became legendary because it symbolized the entire approach. While everyone else was running emergency protocols and preparing for mass casualties, one human was more concerned about caffeine levels than cosmic collapse. The thermos now sits in the Galactic Museum of First Contacts with a plaque that simply reads, "Priorities." Here's the thing about human adaptability. It looks like pure chaos to everyone else. Galactic species value specialized evolution and perfected techniques, because that's what creates reliable systems. We spend centuries refining a single technology until it operates within precise parameters. Humans treat specialization like it's some kind of limitation they need to work around, rather than an achievement to be proud of. They'll use a medical scanner as a welding torch if it gets the job done. I've seen them repurpose communication arrays into defensive shields and turn environmental controls into offensive weapons. Their ability to make technology do things it was never designed for violates 57 galactic safety protocols that exist for very good reasons. Most species develop safety systems to prevent accidents. Humans seem to view safety protocols as suggestions that might be worth considering if they have nothing better to do. Studies show human neural plasticity exceeds any recorded species by 300%. Their brains literally rewire themselves faster when facing new challenges. Where other species have dedicated neurological pathways for specific problem-solving methods, humans maintain this messy network of connections that can reconfigure on the fly. It's like comparing a carefully organized toolkit to a pile of parts that can become any tool needed. This chaotic approach consistently produces results where precision fails because they're not limited by predetermined solutions. When a standard containment field won't stabilize, they don't try to make better containment fields. They'll create something entirely different that happens to solve the stabilization problem as a side effect. Their solutions often look like accidental successes until you realize they've somehow made accidents work in their favor consistently. Their neural flexibility creates this fascinating contradiction. They can be both deeply traditional and radically innovative within the same decision-making process. They'll cling to ancient customs while simultaneously inventing completely new technologies to preserve those customs. It's like watching someone use quantum physics to keep a centuries-old coffee brewing technique functional aboard a starship. What makes this adaptability so effective is that it's not really chaos at all. It's a different kind of order that we simply don't recognize. Their methods follow patterns too, just patterns that aren't based on the same logical foundations as other species. They prioritize practical outcomes over theoretical perfection, immediate functionality over long-term stability, and creative solutions over proven methods. So there I was, watching human shortcomings become their greatest assets. Galactic strategists considered human emotional volatility a critical weakness in their initial assessments. Standard military doctrine teaches that controlled detachment leads to optimal decision-making under pressure. Emotional species tend to make rash judgments, overcommit resources, or break formation when facing unexpected setbacks. The tactical models all pointed to humans being fundamentally unsuited for coordinated military operations because they refused to maintain emotional discipline. During the Cygnus blockade, that supposed volatility became unpredictable tactical genius. When the 7th Fleet encountered an impenetrable defensive network that should have forced surrender, the human commanders didn't follow standard withdrawal procedures. Instead, they got what I can only describe as creatively angry. One captain repurposed cargo shuttles as projectile weapons by loading them with mining explosives and slingshotting them using gravitational assists. Another team hacked environmental systems to create localized storms that disabled enemy sensors. Where other species would recognize mathematically untenable situations and surrender to preserve resources, humans treat impossible odds as personal insults. Their innovation doesn't peak during calm assessment periods. It skyrockets when they're emotionally engaged. Analysis shows human crisis problem-solving effectiveness increases by nearly 40%, under conditions that would cause most species to experience cognitive degradation. They literally think better when they should be thinking worse. This emotional engagement creates solutions that no rational assessment would ever propose. I watched an engineering team bypass 16 safety protocols because they were, and I quote, too annoyed to do it properly. Their improvised solution worked where the approved methods had failed for 3 consecutive cycles. The same emotional intensity that makes them argue about sports statistics with shocking fervor also lets them focus on technical problems with unnatural persistence. What looks like weakness in peacetime becomes strategic advantage during emergencies because humans channel emotional energy into practical solutions. They don't suppress frustration or fear, they weaponize it. A human soldier might perform better when angry than when calm, which contradicts every standard psychological profile in galactic databases. Their emotional states don't interfere with performance so much as redirect it into unconventional channels. The resolution lies in their ability to transmute perceived flaws into functional tools. Panic becomes heightened awareness. Anger becomes focused determination. And even despair transforms into the stubborn refusal to accept inevitable outcomes. They've turned what should be liabilities into assets through pure psychological alchemy. Their stubbornness is particularly effective because it operates outside rational calculation. Where other species recognize when further effort becomes statistically meaningless, humans interpret the same data as a challenge to try harder. This isn't blind persistence, it's a calculated rejection of calculated outcomes. They'll spend more resources to prove a point than most species would spend to achieve actual objectives. By the time of the gravitic anomaly incident, we should have known better. This was the first Class 9 cosmic event humanity encountered, the kind of scenario that fills emergency manuals with evacuation protocols and containment procedures. Standard response called for immediate sector-wide evacuation and deployment of quantum stabilizers across 12 light-years of affected space. Every other species recognized the gravity of the situation. Instinctively, it was in our evolutionary programming to treat such events with appropriate seriousness. Their assessment team called it an interesting physics problem rather than a catastrophe. I watched their lead scientist arrive at the emergency briefing with coffee stains on her lab coat and what appeared to be breakfast pastry crumbs in her notes. While other species were drafting evacuation plans and calculating casualty projections, the humans were taking detailed measurements and arguing about theoretical implications. They treated the anomaly like a rare natural phenomenon rather than an existential threat. The anomaly was rewriting local physics at a quantum level, causing fundamental constants to fluctuate across 3 solar systems. Matter was becoming unstable, energy conservation laws were failing, and temporal distortions were making coordinated response nearly impossible. Standard containment methods failed within hours because the equipment itself became subject to the altered physics. Advanced species watched their technology degrade into uselessness as the very rules of reality shifted around them. Humanity's scientific curiosity overrode survival instincts in ways that seemed fundamentally irrational. Their researchers set up observation posts dangerously close to the anomaly's event horizon, more concerned with data collection than personal safety. I watched one engineer recalibrate sensors while gravitational forces were actively deforming the structure around her. She complained about instrument calibration more than the fact that her own body was experiencing spatial distortion. What made this the first major Tuesday incident was the complete mismatch between response and reality. While galactic emergency protocols treated this as a disaster to be survived, humans approached it as an opportunity to be understood. They weren't trying to stop the anomaly so much as figure out how it worked. Their assessment reports read like academic papers rather than crisis management documents, complete with hypotheses and proposed experiments. Their problem-solving methods defied all galactic standards because they refused to accept the premise of the problem itself. Where we saw something to be contained, they saw something to be studied. Where we developed procedures to minimize damage, they developed instruments to maximize understanding. The entire approach was backwards according to every established protocol, yet they somehow stabilized the anomaly through methods that still don't appear in any physics textbooks. The resolution came not from fighting the phenomenon, but from understanding its patterns. Humans mapped the quantum fluctuations and found they weren't random. They followed complex but predictable cycles. By working with the anomaly's rhythms rather than against them, they created stabilization fields that adapted to the changing physics, instead of trying to impose consistent rules. It was like learning to surf a tsunami rather than building a wall against it. Their methods worked precisely because they didn't try to make reality conform to their expectations. They adapted their expectations to match reality, no matter how strange that reality became. This flexible thinking allowed solutions that rigid protocols could never achieve, proving that sometimes the best way to solve a problem is to stop treating it like a problem at all. Their approach wasn't just different, it was fundamentally oppositional to how every other species operates. Psychological studies show human humor as a coping mechanism under extreme stress. Their neural responses to danger include increased production of chemicals that facilitate creative thinking and social bonding. Where other species evolved physiological responses that enhance focus through suppression of extraneous stimuli, humans developed patterns that maintain cognitive flexibility through apparent distraction. Their joking and storytelling during crises isn't lack of seriousness, it's a different kind of seriousness entirely. This apparent lack of seriousness masks incredible effectiveness because it prevents cognitive tunnel vision. While other species narrow their focus to the immediate threat, humans maintain broad awareness that often identifies secondary issues and opportunities. I watched a human engineer notice a failing support beam while joking with his teammate about the game's statistics. He fixed it almost absently while continuing the conversation, preventing a structural collapse that would have gone unnoticed by teams operating with single-minded focus. Other species react with initial bewilderment that gradually shifts toward awe as results become apparent. The same behaviors that seem unprofessional during the response reveal their value in the outcomes. Commanders who initially dismissed human methods as reckless later studied them intensely, trying to understand how casual conversation could coexist with precision engineering under extreme duress. The transformation in perception follows a predictable pattern from confusion to curiosity to respect. The resolution lies in recognizing that human effectiveness doesn't follow visible intensity indicators. Their calm exterior often conceals intense internal processing, while their animated discussions might accompany routine tasks. You can't gauge their engagement level by surface behaviors because their performance metrics operate on different scales. They might appear relaxed while solving complex problems, and intensely focused while performing simple tasks. This adaptability isn't just psychological, it's technological too. Their equipment reflects the same flexible thinking, designed for multiple purposes and easy modification under field conditions. Where other species develop specialized tools for specific scenarios, humans create general tools that can become specialized through improvisation. Their technology anticipates the need for adaptation in ways that standardized equipment never could. Here's the thing about human adaptability. It's their greatest weapon against advanced adversaries. Galactic warfare follows predictable patterns based on technology and doctrine, because that's what centuries of military evolution produces. You know, the Cressian fleet will attack in wedge formation, the Vorlon ships will prioritize shield reinforcement, and the Tholian vessels will attempt boarding actions. The patterns become so established that battles often feel like rehearsed performances where everyone knows their lines and movements in advance. Humans will turn asteroid mining equipment into planetary defense systems. I watched a mining laser array modified to target incoming missiles with precision that rivaled dedicated anti-projectile systems. Their engineers reconfigured ore processors into electromagnetic pulse generators that disabled enemy sensors across entire battlefields. What other civilizations consider single-purpose equipment becomes multi-role technology in human hands, often performing functions the original designers never imagined possible. Their ability to improvise weapons from non-combat technology is unprecedented in galactic military history. I've seen them convert cargo transporters into troop deployment systems, modify medical scanners to detect cloaked vessels, and turn communication arrays into jamming devices that disrupt entire fleet coordination systems. Where other species develop specialized warfare technology, humans develop technology that can become warfare-oriented when necessary. Military analysts note human asymmetric adaptation exceeds tactical innovation and effectiveness. It's not just that they create new tactics, they redefine the available resources for implementing those tactics. Their approach turns civilian infrastructure into military assets, commercial technology into weapon systems, and even environmental features into strategic advantages. An unremarkable asteroid belt becomes a defensive network, a solar flare becomes an offensive tool, and a planetary magnetic field becomes a navigation hazard for enemies. This technological flexibility defeats superior firepower by changing the terms of engagement. Advanced adversaries expect to face specific types of resistance based on technological assessments. When humans respond with unexpected systems created from repurposed equipment, it disrupts tactical calculations and force allocation models. I've watched fleets with overwhelming advantages hesitate because they couldn't classify the defensive systems they were facing. What makes human adaptability so uniquely effective against alien adversaries is that it operates outside technological hierarchies. Other civilizations measure military capability by energy output, shield strength, and weapon precision. Humans measure capability by effectiveness, regardless of how that effectiveness is achieved. They'll use lower technology to defeat higher technology if the application proves more effective in practice. Their approach values functional outcomes over technical specifications. A crude solution that works immediately often beats a refined solution that requires deployment time. This prioritization of immediate functionality over theoretical superiority creates constant uncertainty for opponents who rely on technological assessments to plan engagements. You never know what humans will field against you, because they might not know themselves until the battle begins. This extends to finding solutions others miss completely because they're not limited by conventional thinking about what constitutes military technology. Their perspective treats every system, every piece of equipment, and every environmental factor as potential tools rather than fixed elements. This worldview transforms limitations into opportunities and obstacles into advantages through pure cognitive flexibility. By the time of the dark matter incursion, we'd learned to watch humans closely. Galactic science had declared the incursion unstoppable through conventional means after 3 cycles of failed containment attempts. The leading physicists from 7 advanced civilizations had run every possible simulation, all pointing to the same conclusion. This was an unstoppable natural phenomenon that would eventually consume 12 systems. Standard protocol shifted from containment to managed evacuation and loss mitigation strategies. Everyone understood the situation except the human research team that arrived 3 days into the crisis. Their lead scientist looked at the same data everyone else had been studying and asked why we were trying to stop it, rather than use it. This wasn't a rhetorical question. She genuinely seemed confused about our approach to what she viewed as a potential energy source rather than a threat. Where every other civilization saw an unstoppable force of destruction, humans saw an untapped resource waiting to be harnessed. Their perspective fundamentally redefined the problem from something to be solved to something to be understood and utilized. Advanced civilizations often become trapped in solution paradigms based on historical successes. We develop methods that work for certain types of problems, and then apply those methods to new problems that resemble old ones. The dark matter incursion resembled previous energy-based catastrophes, so we applied energy-based solutions. Humans approached it without those preconceptions, treating it as a completely novel phenomenon, rather than a variation on established themes. Their research team included specialists from fields we wouldn't have considered relevant: fluid dynamics, material science, even agricultural engineering. Human perspective shifts create breakthrough solutions because they refuse to accept initial problem definitions. Where we see a wall that needs breaking, they see a structure that might be climbed, bypassed, or used as shelter. Their researchers began mapping the incursion's energy patterns not to contain them, but to understand how they might be redirected or stored. They treated the phenomenon like weather patterns rather than weapons fire, something to be worked with rather than against. They consistently find solutions that advanced alien civilizations miss because they maintain what they call beginner's mind, approaching each problem as if encountering it for the first time regardless of previous experience. Our civilizations accumulate knowledge that becomes organizational memory, while humans accumulate knowledge that remains individual and flexible. Their experts can ignore established consensus when it conflicts with their observations, which should create chaos, but instead often produces innovation. The resolution came when human engineers developed containment fields that didn't stop the dark matter flow, but channeled it into storage systems that could harness the energy. What we saw as an unstoppable destructive force became a power source for 3 sectors within 6 months. Their solution involved principles that violated 7 established physical laws according to our understanding, but worked perfectly according to observable results. Sometimes their solutions look like chaos until they work, because the underlying logic isn't visible until the solution is implemented. The dark matter containment system appeared to be a random collection of components until it activated and began functioning with elegant precision. What seemed like improvisation revealed itself as careful engineering based on principles we hadn't considered applicable to the problem. Their methods often appear disordered because they follow organizational patterns that aren't standardized across their species. After observing 17 major incidents, a pattern emerges in human chaos. What appears as disorganization often follows an unrecognizable logic. Their methods don't follow established decision trees or procedural flows, because they've apparently decided that predictability is overrated. I've watched human teams operate in what looked like complete confusion, only to produce perfectly coordinated results at the critical moment. Their chaos has structure, just not any structure we recognize. Their solutions frequently violate multiple safety protocols simultaneously because they prioritize outcome over process. The Sigma radiation cleanup involved methods that should have caused secondary disasters according to every risk assessment model. They used unshielded equipment near radioactive materials, bypassed containment procedures, and worked without proper protective gear. Standard protocol called for remote operations with robotic equipment and gradual containment over weeks. Humans completed the cleanup in 3 days using modified construction equipment and what appeared to be homemade radiation shields. Statistical analysis shows human high-risk methods have unexpectedly high success rates where cautious approaches fail. Their calculations seem to account for variables that don't appear in standard risk models. Where our safety protocols assume worst-case scenarios for every possible failure, humans assume they can handle failures as they occur. This isn't recklessness. It's a different risk calculus that values time and results over absolute safety margins. Their approach accepts that sometimes preventing bigger disasters requires risking smaller ones. Calculated risk-taking produces results where caution fails, because it allows solutions that conventional thinking would reject as too dangerous. I watched engineers enter contaminated zones without full protective suits because the suits would have slowed them down too much. They calculated that brief exposure was preferable to delayed response, and their medical teams had countermeasures ready that weren't in standard emergency manuals. Their risk assessment included capabilities that don't exist in other species' response plans. Specific examples show humanity turning chaos into victory through sheer resilience rather than perfect planning. During the orbital station collapse, they used construction drones for rescue operations, despite the drones not being rated for emergency response. The equipment malfunctioned twice during the operation, but they fixed it faster than proper rescue vessels could have arrived. Their solution wasn't elegant, but it saved 47 lives that would have been lost waiting for approved equipment. Another incident involved using cargo shuttles as temporary medical facilities during a pandemic outbreak. The shuttles lacked proper isolation systems, so they created makeshift containment fields using environmental controls and plastic sheeting. Medical experts predicted cross-contamination and secondary infections, but the humans managed the outbreak with lower transmission rates than dedicated medical facilities achieved. Their improvisation worked because they focused on practical containment rather than theoretical perfection. Their resilience comes from expecting things to go wrong and having backup plans for their backup plans. Where other species develop single solutions, humans develop multiple approaches knowing some will fail. This layered thinking looks messy, but creates redundant systems that conventional planning can't match. They don't see failed attempts as failures, they see them as data collection for the next attempt. This approach is changing galactic politics fundamentally because it demonstrates that established power structures aren't necessarily the most effective ones. Species that followed all the rules are now watching humans succeed by breaking them, which creates uncomfortable questions about why those rules existed in the first place. The very foundations of galactic governance are being questioned because a supposedly primitive species keeps solving problems that advanced civilizations couldn't handle. Let me start by saying human crisis response has rewritten galactic power structures in ways nobody anticipated. Before humanity entered the scene, political influence correlated directly with technological advancement and military capability. The species with the biggest fleets and most advanced systems called the shots because that's how galactic politics worked for millennia. It was simple math. If you could project power across star systems, you got a seat at the big table. Everything from resource allocation to diplomatic priority followed this established hierarchy. Now species seek human assistance regardless of their official status or technology. I've watched civilizations with technology centuries ahead of humanity's beg for their help with problems their own scientists couldn't solve. It's created this strange inversion, where the most advanced species sometimes take orders from what should be junior members of the galactic community. Their Tuesday approach has created unexpected alliances and dependencies that cut across traditional political lines. Species that would never normally cooperate find themselves working together because they both need human expertise. Galactic trade routes have shifted to prioritize human sectors not because of their economic output, but because of their problem-solving value. Shipping lanes that used to connect manufacturing centers now detour through human space just to be near their response teams. The value isn't in what humans produce, but in what they can fix when things go wrong. This has created economic dependencies that traditional power metrics never accounted for. How problem-solving ability transcends traditional power metrics becomes clear when you see who gets invited to crisis meetings. I've been in emergency sessions where species with massive fleets wait quietly, while a human engineer with coffee stains on their shirt explains the solution. The balance of influence has shifted from who has the most weapons to who can actually solve the problem at hand. This has completely upended centuries of diplomatic tradition and power brokerage. Humanity's Tuesday approach changed the balance of galactic politics by introducing a new currency of influence. Demonstrated capability. It doesn't matter how many ships you have if you can't stop a quantum cascade failure or contain a biological outbreak. Species that built their influence on technological superiority now find themselves needing to prove their continued relevance beyond mere hardware specifications. The political landscape has become more fluid, with alliances forming around specific capabilities rather than broad power blocks. This shift has created strange bedfellows throughout the galactic community. I've seen traditional rivals sitting at the same table because they both need access to human crisis response teams. The old political maps based on technological tiers and military alliances are being redrawn to account for these new practical relationships. Influence now flows to those who can deliver solutions, not just those who can deliver threats. Military strategists are desperately trying to understand this new reality because it defies all their training and doctrine. They're used to calculating power based on fleet sizes and weapons yields, not on creative problem-solving abilities. The fact that a species with relatively primitive technology can wield such influence purely through unconventional thinking has thrown centuries of strategic planning into disarray. They're studying human methods not just to counter them, but to understand how to operate in this new political environment, where traditional power calculations no longer apply. So there I was, reviewing the new curriculum at the Galactic War College. Traditional military education always focused on technology, doctrine, and discipline because those were the measurable factors that won wars. You studied shield harmonics, assault formations, and command structures that had been perfected over centuries. Cadets learned to follow procedures that had been tested in countless engagements, building on established knowledge rather than questioning fundamentals. The entire system was designed to produce officers who could implement proven strategies with precision and reliability. Now they have entire departments studying human improvisational tactics. I walked through corridors where cadets analyzed footage of human engineers using construction equipment for combat engineering and medical teams repurposing diagnostic tools for battlefield triage. The instructors teach courses with titles like Unconventional Resource Allocation and Adaptive Field Modification Techniques. Where previous generations learned to request specialized equipment, current cadets learn how to create what they need from available resources. Their textbooks include case studies on coffee thermoses and multi-tools as serious tactical assets. I saw cadets writing papers analyzing how a simple thermal container could maintain team morale during extended operations, or how a basic toolset could perform repairs that normally required specialized equipment bays. The academic journals now publish analyses of human field modifications that would have been dismissed as amateurish innovations a decade ago. They're studying things we used to consider beneath military consideration. Analysis shows human methods cannot be systematized without losing effectiveness. The War College's research division has attempted to create standardized versions of human improvisation techniques, but the results always lack the original effectiveness. The problem is that formalizing improvisation creates procedures that defeat the purpose of improvisation itself. You can't teach someone to be creatively adaptive through rote learning. The very act of systematization removes the flexibility that makes it work. How? Attempting to formalize human approaches fails to capture their essence. Becomes clear when you watch cadets practice. Improvised tactics. They follow the instructions perfectly, but miss the underlying mindset that makes those tactics effective. The human approach isn't about specific actions, but about a way of thinking that treats every situation as unique and every resource as potentially multifunctional. You can teach the what but not the how of their decision-making. Process alien military strategists now study human crisis response techniques as examples of emergent problem-solving rather than predetermined solutions. They analyze the patterns behind the chaos, looking for the cognitive frameworks that allow humans to see opportunities where others see obstacles. The focus has shifted from copying specific actions to understanding the mental flexibility that generates those actions. They're trying to learn how to think like humans think, rather than what humans do. This represents a complete reputation overhaul from their early assessment as technologically limited primitives. Military academies that once dismissed human methods as reckless improvisation now treat them as advanced tactical concepts worthy of serious study. The same behaviors that were once cited as evidence of their unsuitability for coordinated operations are now taught as examples of adaptive leadership under pressure. The change in curriculum reflects a broader shift in how military effectiveness is measured. It's no longer about who has the most advanced technology, but about who can best adapt technology to unexpected situations. This new perspective values flexibility over specification, creativity over procedure, and results over methodology. The military establishment is learning that sometimes the most advanced approach is the one that doesn't follow established patterns. Here's the thing about human reputation. It's undergone the most dramatic shift in galactic history. Initial assessments classified humans as technologically primitive but aggressively curious, which in diplomatic terms meant we thought they'd be mostly harmless if kept away from the good silverware. The classification reports highlighted their limited technological capabilities, while noting their unfortunate tendency to investigate things that should be left alone. Most species develop curiosity in proportion to their capability. Humans developed curiosity as a substitute for capability. Within 3 generations, they became the first species called for impossible problems. I watched their designation change from potential threat to essential resource in official databases. Where we once had protocols for containing human curiosity, we now have procedures for requesting human assistance. The same species we considered too primitive for full council membership now gets emergency summons when established powers can't handle a crisis. Their reputation transformed faster than any species in recorded history, because results speak louder than assessments. Galactic crisis resolution. Success rates increased significantly after incorporating human methods. The improvement wasn't incremental, it was transformative. Problems that had stumped entire scientific academies for cycles got solved in days or hours once humans got involved. Their pragmatic approaches produced results where refined methods had failed repeatedly. The data showed clear patterns of effectiveness that overrode generations of prejudice and established thinking. Demonstrated capability overrode initial prejudice because you can't argue with working solutions. When humans fixed the Omega maintenance issue that had baffled roboticists for years, the galactic authorities had to acknowledge their methods worked. The incident got documented as a standard maintenance issue with quick resolution time in official records. What had been considered an impossible crisis became routine once humans showed how to handle it. Their reputation shifted because they kept delivering results that contradicted all expectations. Humanity's reputation evolved from primitive species to cosmic problem solvers through consistent demonstration that their approaches worked where others failed. They didn't argue their case through diplomatic channels or political maneuvering. They just kept solving problems everyone else considered unsolvable. Their value became impossible to ignore when entire sectors started depending on their crisis response capabilities. The transformation occurred because they proved that capability matters more than technology, and results matter more than reputation. This reveals something fundamental about strength itself. We'd always measured strength in terms of firepower, technology, and resources. Humans demonstrated that strength could also mean adaptability, creativity, and persistence. Their reputation changed because they redefined what strength meant in practical terms. They showed that sometimes the strongest response isn't the most powerful one, but the most appropriate one for the situation at hand. This understanding has forced a reevaluation of how we assess all species' capabilities and potential contributions. The shift wasn't just about recognizing human value, it was about recognizing that our entire framework for evaluating strength had been incomplete. We'd been measuring the wrong things because we assumed strength followed certain predictable patterns. Humans proved that strength could take completely unexpected forms and still be effective. Their rise from primitive newcomers to essential problem solvers revealed gaps in our understanding of capability itself. This realization has implications far beyond human integration into galactic society. It suggests we need to reconsider how we evaluate potential threats and allies across the board. By the time you've watched enough Tuesdays, you start questioning everything about strength. Galactic definitions always involved power output, fleet size, and technological level because those are easy to measure and compare. We had charts and graphs and ranking systems that placed every species in neat little boxes, based on quantifiable capabilities. Strength was something you could calculate with equations and display on status screens. It was clean, predictable, and completely wrong. Humans demonstrate strength through persistence, creativity, and refusal to accept defeat. I've watched them work on problems for cycles after everyone else declared them unsolvable. Their engineering teams will try 50 different approaches, where other species would try 3 and then file a failure report. This isn't stubbornness. It's a different understanding of what constitutes effort versus results. They measure strength by outcomes rather than inputs, which changes the entire equation. Their greatest weapons are psychological rather than technological. While other species develop better shields and stronger weapons, humans develop better ways to use whatever they have available. I've seen them turn communication systems into defensive networks and medical equipment into tactical tools. Their advantage doesn't come from having superior technology, but from having superior understanding of how to apply technology in unexpected ways. Studies show human group cohesion under stress exceeds any measurable metric. Their teams operate with coordination that shouldn't be possible given their apparent disorganization. Where other species follow clear command structures, humans develop organic coordination that adapts to changing circumstances. This isn't chaos, it's a different kind of order that we simply don't recognize because it doesn't follow our patterns. Redefining strength changes assessment of all species because it reveals that our measurements were incomplete. We've been evaluating capabilities based on hardware specifications while ignoring the software that operates that hardware. Human success demonstrates that the most important factors might be the ones we can't easily quantify: flexibility, creativity, and determination. This forces a complete reevaluation of how we assess potential threats and allies. Humanity's success against galactic crises reveals that true strength isn't about having the most resources, but about making the most of whatever resources you have. Their approach shows that capability isn't determined by what you possess, but by how you use it. This understanding turns traditional power calculations upside down and suggests that we've been measuring the wrong things for centuries. The resolution lies in recognizing that strength is contextual rather than absolute. What makes humans effective isn't some universal superiority, but their ability to match their approach to the specific challenge at hand. They don't try to be strong in all situations. They try to be exactly as strong as needed for each particular problem. This situational awareness creates effectiveness where brute force often fails. This understanding comes from watching them work, rather than studying their specifications. You can't capture their approach in technical manuals or performance metrics because it's not about what they have, but how they think. The true nature of strength appears to be less about capacity and more about application, less about resources and more about resourcefulness. Their methods suggest that sometimes the strongest response is the most appropriate one, rather than the most powerful one. You know, I finally understood the Tuesday contingency during the quantum cascade failure. The manual contains protocols for things no other species would attempt because they violate fundamental safety principles and established physics. It's not just a collection of emergency procedures. It's a guide to thinking like humans think when the universe is falling apart around you. The contingencies cover scenarios that would make most species surrender immediately, treating them as solvable problems rather than inevitable disasters. Section 47.3 literally includes, if human brings thermos, provide additional coffee as an official protocol. This isn't some unofficial guideline or informal suggestion. It's printed in the standard operational manual, alongside radiation containment procedures and evacuation protocols. The entry continues with specific instructions about caffeine access and optimal brewing temperatures, treating human beverage requirements with the same seriousness as life support system maintenance. This level of detail shows how thoroughly the galactic community has documented human operational needs. Their methods have been documented but remain incomprehensible to most species because the documentation captures the what, without explaining the why. We can see that humans use certain techniques, but we can't replicate the thinking that generates those techniques. The contingency manual has tripled in size since first contact, expanding faster than any other emergency protocol system in galactic history. Each new crisis adds another dozen entries, as we try to codify approaches that fundamentally resist codification. How formalizing the informal creates galactic scale change becomes apparent when you see how other species are adapting. Emergency response teams now carry equipment that would have been considered irrelevant decades ago: multi-tools, general-purpose adhesives, and yes, coffee brewing systems. The very act of documenting human methods has forced reconsideration of what constitutes proper emergency preparedness across multiple civilizations. We're learning that sometimes the most valuable equipment isn't the most specialized but the most adaptable. The ongoing evolution of human integration into galactic crisis response reflects this gradual shift in thinking. Where we once tried to make humans follow our protocols, we're now learning to follow their lead when protocols fail. This isn't just about adopting new techniques. It's about adopting a new mindset that values results over procedure and adaptability over predictability. The integration process has become less about teaching humans our ways and more about learning their ways while maintaining necessary safety standards. This leads to some uncomfortable truths about our own limitations as supposedly advanced civilizations. The fact that we need a special manual for dealing with one species suggests that our standard approaches might be too rigid for real-world emergencies. Human effectiveness highlights how our own systems have become trapped in paradigms that prioritize safety over solutions and procedure over results. Their success forces us to question whether our advanced civilization status reflects actual capability or just comfortable tradition. The Tuesday contingency represents more than just emergency protocols. It's a mirror showing us where our own thinking has become constrained by centuries of refinement. Human methods work not because they're better in some absolute sense, but because they're less constrained by preconceptions about how things should be done. Their approach reminds us that sometimes the most advanced solution is the one that questions whether the problem has been properly defined in the first place. Let me tell you something uncomfortable about being advanced. Technological sophistication creates certain blind spots that we don't like to acknowledge. The more specialized a civilization becomes, the less adaptable it tends to be because we optimize for efficiency rather than flexibility. We develop perfect solutions to known problems while losing the ability to handle unexpected ones. Our systems become so refined that they can't accommodate anything outside their design parameters. Human primitiveness preserved capabilities we've engineered out of ourselves. While we were developing specialized equipment for every possible scenario, they maintained general tools and general skills. Their technology isn't as refined, but it's more flexible because it wasn't designed to do just one thing perfectly. They never lost the ability to make things work with whatever's available because they never had the luxury of assuming specialized equipment would always be. Their studies show inverse correlation between technological specialization and crisis adaptability. The more advanced a civilization's technology becomes, the worse it handles situations that require improvised solutions. Our systems are so optimized that they can't function outside narrow parameters. Human technology is less efficient but more robust because it was designed to handle imperfect conditions and unexpected challenges from the beginning. How human success challenges fundamental assumptions about progress becomes clear when you see them solve problems that stump more advanced species. We assume technological advancement meant better crisis response, but it turns out there's a point where advancement becomes limitation. Our pursuit of perfect solutions created systems that can't handle imperfect situations. Humans succeed because they never developed the assumption that problems would conform to their solutions. The galactic reconsideration of what truly constitutes advancement is underway because human methods work where ours fail. We're starting to question whether technological sophistication is the only measure of progress. Maybe adaptability and resilience matter more than pure technical capability in a universe full of unexpected challenges. Our definition of advanced might need to include the ability to handle the unknown, rather than just perfect the known. This brings us to the essential human lesson about what we've lost in our pursuit of perfection. Our advanced civilizations became fragile because we eliminated redundancy and flexibility in favor of efficiency. Humans maintained messy, overlapping capabilities that serve them well when systems fail. Their approach suggests that true advancement might mean preserving options rather than eliminating them, and valuing adaptability over optimization. We're learning that sometimes the most sophisticated solution is the one that keeps working when everything else fails. So there I was, finally understanding what makes a Tuesday just another Tuesday for humans. It's not that they don't recognize the danger, they simply refuse to be limited by it. Where other species see barriers, humans see interesting puzzles. This mindset represents something we'd lost generations ago in our relentless pursuit of perfection. We became so focused on creating flawless systems that we forgot how to handle flawed situations. Their greatest strength is treating impossible problems as interesting challenges rather than existential threats. I've watched engineers discuss quantum anomalies with the same casual curiosity most species reserve for mild weather patterns. They approach cosmic disasters like fascinating experiments rather than emergencies to be survived. This perspective shift changes everything about how they allocate resources and prioritize actions. Psychological analysis shows human problem orientation differs fundamentally from other species. They don't categorize problems as solvable or unsolvable. They categorize them as understood or not yet understood. This subtle distinction makes all the difference when facing truly novel challenges. Where we see impossibility, they see incomplete information. Their entire approach is built around gathering more data rather than accepting limitations. This approach can be learned but not copied because it's not a technique but a worldview. You can teach someone human methods, but you can't teach them to think like humans think. Their adaptability is rooted in evolutionary history that demanded constant problem-solving under changing conditions. They never developed the luxury of assuming their environment would remain stable or their tools would always function as intended. The final understanding of human uniqueness in the galactic community comes down to this fundamental difference in perspective. They don't have better technology or superior intelligence. They have better questions. When faced with failure, they ask why something didn't work rather than accepting that it couldn't work. This relentless curiosity drives solutions that more advanced species miss because they stop asking questions sooner. Watching humans work teaches you that capability isn't about what you can do with perfect tools, but what you can do with imperfect ones. Their entire approach values functionality over refinement and results over methodology. This mindset creates solutions where more sophisticated approaches fail, because it doesn't get trapped by assumptions about how things should work. Which brings me to my final assessment. After observing countless crises and responses across 17 galactic rotations, I've learned that true advancement isn't about having the right answers, but about asking the right questions. Humans succeed not because they know more, but because they assume less. Their approach reminds us that sometimes the most sophisticated solution is the simplest one that actually works when everything else has failed. The point is, humanity's greatest gift to the galaxy isn't their solutions, it's their perspective. They remind us that sometimes the most advanced approach is simply refusing to accept that something is impossible. Next time you face what seems like an insurmountable problem, ask yourself, what would a human do with a coffee thermos and stubborn determination? Their methods prove that capability isn't about having perfect tools but using imperfect ones effectively. Tell the truth about what you can actually do, not what you're supposed to be able to do, and let the consequences sort themselves out.